The early philosopher Plato and also Aristotle believed that before we were born, we had an awareness of God, that our soul was created within the holiness, and that, as Psalm 139 says, we are then aware of the presence of God as we grow in the womb. Henry Nouwen says that from the moment that we are born, we are always listening for the voice of God, and that God is always speaking to us, that God is always saying to us, I love you, I love you. And that's the single most important message. But we're not listening, or we're not able to listen, or we get distracted. John O'Donoghue talks about the great Irish theologian and inspirational writer. John O'Donoghue talks about the most important thing that we can do in our life is to be connected to the holy. To realize that without being connected to the holy, that we will never feel a sense of satisfaction, that we will never feel that sense of wholeness. Helen Keller wrote at one point, I believe that we were created to learn how to love and courage. She also said, I believe that God is in me as the sun is in the fragrance and the color of a flower. Isn't that beautiful? God is in me as the sun is in the color and the fragrance of a flower. She also said that she believed that God was the light in her darkness, the voice in her silence. So I'm thinking about Hannah. About 600 years ago, this woman went to the Shiloh, the place where they went to offer sacrifices, and she prayed fervently. She prayed passionately because she wanted a child. Her husband's second wife, she had been married for 10 years and not had a child. And her husband gets another wife so that he can have some children. And the second wife is not as favored as she is. She is not as loved as she is. But the second wife has all the children and mocks Hannah. And Hannah is feeling desperate. She's feeling anxious. She's feeling, even though her husband loves her, and even though he treats her with great love and joy and respect, if she doesn't have a child, she is not complete. So she goes to the sanctuary where the Ark of the Covenant is kept, and she prays. And her lips are moving, but there's no sound coming out. So Eli the priest sees her and says, "Are you drunk, woman?" And she goes, No. I need God to hear this prayer. So it ends up that Hannah has a child, and his name is Samuel. God has heard her prayer. Now, if you look at the song of Hannah, you see how Hannah relates to God. Her image of God is that God is over everything, that God gives and God takes away, that God is just, God is compassionate, and that if she is faithful, that God will give her what she wants, that God will give her what she needs. And sure enough, this is what happens. But she makes a sacrifice. She says, I will give you my child, my son, once he is born. I will give him back to you, and he will stay a Nazarene. As you know, a Nazarene at the time was a child who was raised that never tasted grapes or wine or never was intoxicated. His hair was never cut. Later on, his hair would be cut in a ceremony, and that he would be shaven, totally shaven. And that his whole life would be dedicated to the love of God. This is her offering to God. And I think about this in regards to my grandson, who is perfect. Can you hear me breathing into this? Oh, I can hear it and it's annoying me, sorry. My grandson Matthew, I mean, it really is. He's an adorable little boy, and he's learning how to walk, and it's my first grandchild, and I hope first of many. And I watch him growing, and I watch his mom and his dad looking after him and loving him and talking to him and getting him to eat chocolate or ice cream or that sort of thing. And I think of Hannah and how absolutely horrendous it must have been for her once that child was weaned. And the Bible commentators are not quite clear on what that meant, whether it meant that he no longer was being breastfed or whether he was weaned from his mom at the age of 6 to 12. But at some point, she takes this child that she has wanted all her life, or all the years of marriage, and she gives him to Eli the priest for the holiness and the glory of God. And you know how much it is when you love somebody, what that would feel like, the agony of that. Now let's look at the word sacrifice. The origin of the word sacrifice. It actually meant to make something holy. And it was done in love. So it was understood that if you had a lot of cows in your pasture, that you would give one to God because you would share with God, not because it was a sacrifice that was hurtful, but it was because you were inviting God to be part of the larger story of your life. That to give God a cow or to give God something was to say, my life is not holy or complete until God is sharing part of my life. And that's part of Hannah's story, that Hannah is giving to God a part of her life, and something that her love for God is almost greater than her need or love for a child. That's that sense of satisfaction that the theologians and the inspirational writers talk about. That when we are connected with God, we feel satisfied, or we feel a sense of completeness that we don't feel when we are away from God. Do you ever have those days when you haven't been to church, or you haven't talked to anybody, or you haven't prayed, and something doesn't feel right? You just feel like not comfortable in your own soul? It's because you're not connected with all that you are. Last night, I stayed up late and made a whole bunch of pies. I'm not good at it. I have some family visiting from Ireland all through these storms.